Alright, now that the book of Boba Fett is over, let me give you my take on it. It was awful, thanks for watching. Right, that's not gonna hit the 8-minute minimum for full monetization on YouTube, is it? Naomi and I have had a ritual now for a few years. Every Thursday morning, we gather up all the episodes of the various shows that we're currently watching, make a big breakfast and have coffee, and lounge about for several hours and play catch-up. We do this with both old shows that Naomi's never seen that I can rewatch with her, as well as new shows that have new episodes coming out every week. Most recently, we've done this with Twin Peaks, both old and new, Star Trek, both old and new, Attack on Titan, and The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian is a pretty interesting show, all things considered. Let's see if I can describe how. When Disney bought Lucasfilm, something like 50 years of expanded universe canon was wiped out.
As if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced.
Disney announced that in order to make things less restrictive for their writers, they weren't going to completely follow the EU canon, where Luke gets with Mara Jade, and Admiral Thrawn is going around being badass, and the Yuuzhan Vong invade, and Han Solo's son Jacen Solo becomes Darth Caedus, and is killed by his twin sister. No, I'm not worried about spoilers of decades-old stories that are officially non-canon now, as cool as they are. And hey, you know what? I get it. How much of a surprise would it have been, and how restrictive for the creators, if Episode 7 was about Admiral Thrawn, Episode 8 about the Vong, and Episode 9 about Darth Caedus? Sometimes you just need room for new stories. I don't like this whole wipe the slate clean tendency, when you should be cultivating properties, not destroying them.
Let the past die. Kill it, if you have to.
But at the very least, Disney didn't wipe any mainline movies or whatever, so there's that. Therefore, after Disney took control of Star Wars, the new canon looks something like this. The prequel trilogy from 1999 to 2005, set during the first half of Anakin Skywalker's life. The original trilogy from 1977 to 1983, set 20 years later. And the Clone Wars TV series. No, not the good Tartakovsky one. That was overwritten by the shittier CG version. Everything else was made non-canon and placed under the label of Star Wars Legends. From garbage tier stuff like the courtship of Princess Leia to the story of the founding of the rebellion from The Force Unleashed, it was all rendered moot. Future Disney-owned outings would properly tell the story of Princess Leia's romance, or how the rebellion's symbol came to be, thank you very much. While some Legends characters would later return, reimagined for the new lore, the only thing that was considered foundational as far as Disney was concerned is the two trilogies and the Clone Wars series. Afterward, they began to add their own new entries, and boy, were they shit. I've already gone over the sequel trilogy in detail in a previous video, but even beyond them, Rogue One was shit, Star Wars Rebels was shit, Solo was so shit it caused the cancellation of the upcoming Boba Fett and Obi Wan films. While mainline Star Wars turned itself into a public mockery, Disney immolating the property for short-term gain and destroying its legacy in the process, a subtler, less bombastic, and far more interesting show quietly released, and that show was The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian's first episode came out on November 12th, 2019, a month before Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. And even though Episode 9 was this billion-dollar blockbuster with constant advertising and merch and toys, this thing was shoved everywhere you could fucking look, people really didn't like it. It made money, yeah, but way less than it should have, especially considering its budget. And the story was absolutely atrocious. But most importantly of all, it was completely upstaged and outshined by its smaller, quieter brother, The Mandalorian. The Rise of Skywalker was this bombastic, galaxy-spanning story about saving the universe from the Final Order now, with huge space battles and thousands of Star Destroyers with Death Star cannons on them, and there's a race against time to use an ancient Sith dagger to unlock a puzzle, and there's the wreckage of the Death Star on Endor, and Emperor Palpatine returns as a primordial Sith evil who's been alive for thousands of years. Still not giving a shit about spoilers, by the way. While The Mandalorian is a story about a bounty hunter who goes to the seedy underbellies of planets to try and find work. The stakes are lower, and that's a good thing. There's more room to breathe, there's more time for character development. There's no sensory overload of a billion ships all firing at each other in a space battle to end all space battles, at least until the next movie comes out. The Mandalorian knows when to have loud action, and when to be quiet for a little while. Do you recall when Star Trek Picard was billed as this quieter show about Picard in his old age, not getting into his own huge space fights, but instead being involved in a smaller story around town? Which brings back Patrick Stewart as Next Generation Captain Jean-Luc Picard, embraces a more deliberate pace that matches its 79-year-old star, finding Jean-Luc on his French vineyard as he spends time with his loyal dog Number One. That means fewer space shootouts and more quiet introspection, and that's just how the team behind Picard intended it. And then they turn Picard into a giant pile of space laser dog shit. Well, The Mandalorian is actually for Star Wars what Picard was advertised to be for Star Trek. Another point in The Mandalorian's favor, which is equally important but a lot easier to explain, is that in the timeline it takes place between the original and sequel trilogy. A lot of extra Star Wars stuff takes place between the prequel trilogy and the original. The era of the rise of the Empire has been explored to death. But the time period between Luke and Rey is still pretty sparse, even now, so it's refreshing to get another look at how the New Republic works, or see the Empire in decline before the First Order shows up, especially from the point of view of a character who is not aligned with either faction like the Mandalorian. Also, there's Baby Yoda, which instantly became a meme, something that Disney was somehow not prepared for. So when Christmas time 2019 came around, they had all of this worthless Episode 9 merch that nobody wanted to buy, and they had to quickly rush out Baby Yoda branded stuff to meet demand. Check this out. This is the Mandalorian merch from 2019. Look at this shit. It's low quality stills from the show printed onto shirts and mugs and phone cases. It looks like they quickly slapped it together on Cafe Press. How is it that Disney thought this shit was going to go gangbusters, but didn't even notice that the quiet little brother of Star Wars was calmly putting out a money-making machine? The first season of The Mandalorian respects Star Wars lore while artfully adding to it, positioning the Mandalorians as an order of people who are the mortal enemies of the Jedi, and have used their mastery of technology and weaponry to counter the Jedi's use of the Force. The Empire wants to experiment on Baby Yoda for some kind of Force-related midichlorian bullshit. The Mandalorian decides to rescue him, and the two of them go bopping around the galaxy getting into trouble. There is an overarching plot, but each episode also functions as a standalone, where the Mandalorian comes into town, takes a job, solves the problem, and moves on. It's as much of a space western as Star Wars has ever been, and its simplicity works wonders. Season 2 of The Mandalorian is where it starts going into the shitter, presumably because at this point Disney noticed that they had tanked everything else Star Wars related, and The Mandalorian was the only thing earning them both money and the love of their audiences. The success of The Mandalorian Season 1 and the failure of both Solo and Episodes 8 and 9 caused a massive reorientation in Disney's plan. The Boba Fett and Obi Wan movies became TV shows, since people's attention has been shifting away from film and towards TV for over a decade now. And Season 2 of The Mandalorian became less about telling good stories like Season 1, and more about setting up as many spin-off shows as possible. Boba Fett shows up, and his show is given that coveted post-credits scene at the end of Season 2. Ahsoka Tano makes an appearance, and a full arc of the show exists solely to sideline The Mandalorian and serve as a backdoor pilot for her upcoming show. Rangers of the New Republic is also a planned show, stemming from the recurring appearances of these guys. Basically, Disney noticed that the only thing that was taken off that they had made was The Mandalorian, so they hitched as many possible fucking things to it, guaranteeing that its own momentum ground to a halt. I haven't even talked about the Book of Boba Fett yet, and that's because you really do need to understand all of this stuff to know how much of an unmitigated disaster it is. But now, we're here. Boba Fett is an iconic Star Wars character, but unlike the other iconic characters, he's a blank slate. Luke is young and naive, but good-hearted. He confronts evil before he's ready, and he's scarred by it. He matures and conquers the enemy within and without. He's the hero. Han Solo is a bit more dirty. He's in it for the money. He's not above underhanded tricks or scheming or stealing, but when the chips are down, he'll do the right thing. Leia is the bureaucrat, trained in the art of politics, but not accustomed to doing fighting herself, and she grows into a capable military leader in her own right. Lando is the former scoundrel who goes straight. He now runs a respectable business, but he can't quite shake his sketchy past. He's a smooth talker and deal maker. Darth Vader is the quintessential villain, the tortured soul who regrets the mistakes of his youth, but he's in too deep to quit now. Boba Fett is the guy with the cool armor and the cool ship, called Slave One even in the original canon, which Disney refuses to recognize ever again, always referring to it as Boba Fett's ship, or my ship now.
Help me recover my fire spray gunship.
And he does have a couple of lines that make him sound like he's a ruthless dude, but most of the time he just stands in the background looking cool, until he unceremoniously gets smacked in the back by Han Solo in Episode 6, causing his jetpack to fuck up, sending him into the Sarlacc pit. My point is, for some reason that I think just boils down to the rule of cool, fans treated Boba Fett like he was a main Star Wars character, even though there wasn't really much to him. Even George Lucas was surprised that he was so beloved, saying he wouldn't have killed him if he had known.
In the case of Boba Fett's death, had I known he was going to turn into such a popular character, I probably would have made it a little bit more exciting. Boba Fett was just another one of the minions, another one of the bounty hunters and bad guys. But he became such a favorite of everybody's for having such a small part. He had a very large presence. And now that his history has been told in the first trilogy, it makes it even more of a misstep that we wouldn't make more out of the event of his defeat. Because most people don't believe he died anyway. I had contemplating putting that extra shot in where he climbs out of the hole, but I figure it doesn't quite fit in the end.
Maybe it's because he first showed up in the Star Wars Holiday Special? The Mandalorian Season 1 was Disney's way of making a Boba Fett show without committing to it. Din Djarin looks like Boba Fett. He behaves like a reasonable extrapolation of Boba Fett's appearances from the original trilogy, and to a lesser extent his appearances as a child in the Clone Wars series. This was Disney dipping their toes into the Boba Fett waters, and because it was extremely well received, they decided to fully lean into it. But in this case, fully lean in means Disney sends their billion-dollar wrecking ball crashing through everything. The Mandalorian Season 2 introduces Boba Fett proper, looking for his armor, which Din Djarin just so happens to have. Fett gets it back, then he tags along for the rest of the season's adventures, before returning to Tatooine to take over Jabba the Hutt's now vacant throne as Crime Lord. And holy shit, in both Season 2 and Boba Fett's own show, does Bubba look ridiculous. He's just a fat old man wearing the armor of a character that should have died in the Sarlacc pit. Look at him in Return of the Jedi. He's a thin dude. Now he's got a chest that reeks of congested heart failure. His armor barely even hangs off of him. Like, okay, I get it. You hired the Jango Fett actor, and he's a bit too old for the role now. Fine. You know what you do? You scale the armor up and try to play it off, because keeping the armor tiny just makes him look ridiculous. Here, watch, I'll fucking fix it myself. You just take the armor, make sure its dimensions are locked into their current ratio, and just scale it up, make it a little bit bigger. There, it doesn't look good, but it looks better. The Book of Boba Fett was given 7 episodes to cover the following: how Boba Fett survived the Sarlacc pit, what he was doing between Return of the Jedi and his appearance in The Mandalorian, a 5-year span of time, establish why he wants to take over Jabba's throne, and make that desire link up properly with his actions and behaviors during The Mandalorian Season 2, and then have him actually go on his own quest to do that. That's a lot of story arcs to cram into 7 episodes, 7 hours of content, especially considering that the second half of the show goes back to focus on Din Djarin again and not Boba Fett. And the show wraps up everything by the end of the season finale. The entire thing feels rushed and half-baked. The Book of Boba Fett opens with telling the story of that 5-year gap, and it is a by-the-book hero journey. The descent into the underworld, the fundamental change in the self, and the return to civilization with newfound knowledge. In this instance, Fett wakes up inside of the Sarlacc pit in the middle of his own digestion, and he uses his armor's technology to escape it. Once he escapes, he collapses. Jawas scavenge his armor, and the Sand People nurse him back to health, teaching him their ways of living. He becomes an honorary member of their tribe until they're killed by a speeder bike gang, upon which he returns to civilization. It's the best part of the show, and it mirrors other well-told tales. The hero suffers a tragedy and is thrust into the unknown. They need to survive it, learn from it, and eventually master it. They grow and change as a result. Eventually, the hero returns home, able to appreciate its comforts but irrevocably changed. Hell, it's Luke's story from the original Star Wars. The problem is, the reason this story archetype resonates with us is because it also happens to us in real life. When you move out of your parents' house for the first time, when you're responsible for getting yourself up to go to class in university, when you're responsible for your own rent after getting your first real job, the same process is happening. It's not nearly as traumatic, but the parallel is there. You start off young, naive, secure at home, but that can't last forever, and in order to truly grow up, you need to cut yourself loose from your support system and contend with an unfamiliar world. And when this happens in real life, it overwhelmingly happens to young people. It's for that reason that most heroes in fiction who undertake this process are young too. The reason the hero's journey is a story for the young is because parts of human psychology undergo a crystallization process as we get older. Barring a major transformative event, like a hugely traumatic experience or a spiritual awakening or something, most adults don't go through this process the way that kids do, because adults have already gone through it, and they've already learned how to go through it. In other words, when Boba Fett is swinging his gaffy stick with the Sand People, I knew what story the show was trying to tell, and all I could really think was, he's already gone through this, when his father was beheaded in front of him in episode 2. There is no way what they've shown so far is as transformative an event as losing a parent at a young age. After the obligatory slaughter of the Sand People, which spurs Fett back to civilization, he goes looking for his armor, which is where the events of Mandalorian Season 2 happen. Fett tags along because that's the deal that Din Djarin cuts with him for the return of his armor. After that, he decides to go back to Tatooine in his own show to rule the planet, and I spent most of the time wondering, why? You've been all over the galaxy. Why do you want the throne of a backwater shithole? We're given exactly one line describing his motivations, and it is this:
I'm gonna kill that bloated pig who double-crossed me. Take his throne.
You want to head a Gatra?
Why not?
It's not even downstream of the tragic Sand People backstory we got earlier. Okay, fine, you want to be your own boss, but why Tatooine? Why crime? Boba Fett's not even much of a crime lord. He's not nearly ruthless enough throughout his show to be effective at the job. Which is even weirder, because ruthlessness was the only noticeable character trait Boba Fett originally had. The real answer is because there wouldn't be a show otherwise. We need Jabba's palace, and Tatooine, and Rancors, and Wookiees, and the green pig guys, and all the other Star Wars shit. So why the fuck not? The show's meager present-day action is framed by the far more interesting flashback sequences. But once those flashbacks have run their course, the show starts being framed by cutaways to what Din Djarin is doing, how he's holding up without Baby Yoda, what the other Mandalorians are up to. Man, I thought this was a spin-off show. I thought Season 2 would introduce Boba Fett and then he'd go off onto a new adventure. But at this point, the most interesting parts of the show are the times when we cut back to the Mandalorian. And that's when I realized, this show, the Book of Boba Fett, was originally meant to be part of The Mandalorian. No, really! The series was originally conceptualized as The Mandalorian Season 2.5, according to those who worked on it, and the production treated it as such. The first episode of the Book of Boba Fett was referred to as 301, the way a third season's first episode would be according to normal TV show convention. The music is more reminiscent of The Mandalorian than any other property. And the ending title crawl featuring concept art is directly pulled from The Mandalorian. The season's entire second half focuses more on The Mandalorian than Boba Fett, and the final shot of the last episode is The Mandalorian flying off to have a new adventure. Imagine being one of those die-hard fans of Boba Fett, waiting for decades for his own movie, his own show, something, and this is what you get. He's turned into a side character in his own show. He's nothing like he should have been. And the person who sidelines him is exactly what he should have been like. The actual plot of the present time events of the Book of Boba Fett is extremely paint by numbers. Boba Fett wants Jabba's throne. Jabba's cousins leave it to him after a short confrontation because the CG to do those characters is expensive. But the reason they give is because a new villainous group, the Pike Syndicate, is showing up on Tatooine to take over instead. The Pikes are extremely ruthless and they've bullied the other crime lords into submission. And of course, it turns out in the end that they were also the ones who slaughtered Boba Fett's Sand People tribe, because why the fuck not? Boba Fett manages to recruit a ragtag group of people to fight with him, including Fennec Shand, a new character who's been in multiple other Star Wars shows, bridging the lore gap between them. Two green pig guys who act as cannon fodder and predictably die at the end. A Wookiee because do you remember Chewbacca from Star Wars? And a biker gang. Except the bikers all drive on shiny futuristic Vespas and look like really bad cyberpunk cosplay. These guys are easily the worst part of the show. Look at this chase scene. It's fucking abysmal. Even my fat ass can run faster than these guys are going. They've got all this tense music blaring, but this is no Forest of Endor, let me tell you. These dudes are totally useless in a firefight too. They don't look like people who can shoot, and they certainly don't act like it. Nothing like a superfluous spin to increase your accuracy, am I right?
I'll try spinning. That's a good trick.
Also, what the fuck is that? Did you see that? Do you see this? You can see inside the facade of the sets from this angle. How do you miss this? How do you not CG this shit out? You guys spent $15 million an episode on this, and the city looks like the inside of my shed out back. Anyway, Din Djarin also comes back to help out, and when the war comes, Boba Fett convinces the other crime lords to remain neutral while he and his, 10 guys fight off the entire Pike Syndicate, which is a deal they all promptly break, so it's Boba Fett and his 10 guys who fight off all the Pikes and all the other syndicates, and they just win. It's laughable, they even directly say it.
Our forces are quietly patrolling the streets of the old city.
The Pike Syndicate has not yet arrived in numbers, but the minute they do, we will see them before they see us. The Gamorrean guards are posted in the Clactunian territory at the starport and will alert us if any of the Pike Syndicate forces arrive. Chrysanthemum is in Trandoshan territory, keeping tabs on the streets of the municipality in front of City Hall. Drash and Scad are with the other mods, keeping an eye on the Workers' District and the Aqualish Quarter.
As you can see, all our flanks are covered. Nobody is sneaking up on us.
They're literally putting 1 or 2 dudes at each post. They're not a mafia, they're a club. They never credibly establish that anybody cares about Boba Fett's organization. But we've got to rush to the final confrontation where Boba Fett manages to win because he pulls out his Rancor. And okay, yeah, fair enough, it's a cool sequence, but it's unearned. And that's the entire show. Cool, but unearned. The overall plot is a lot like Walking Tall. Hero leaves civilization and learns new wisdom. Check. Hero returns home with newfound perspective. Check. Hero discovers his home is now overrun with baddies in his absence, and he sets out to make things right. Check. Hero liberates the community and the townspeople spread rose petals along his path when he walks. Check. But none of it is earned. The skeleton of a solid plot is here, but they never spend enough time developing any of the essential connections that would make the plot actually work. They never show the people suffering under the heel of the Pikes or the Hutt cousins, and they never show the people secretly crying out for Boba Fett to save them. In the absence of popularity, they don't establish that Boba Fett has the numbers or the power to simply impose his will on the city. In fact, they explicitly say he doesn't.
I have plenty of credits. What I'm short on is muscle.
They don't even establish why Boba Fett wants to do it, not in any meaningful way. He just does it because Disney sees dollar signs, that's it. The Book of Boba Fett suffers from cool scene-itis. The Rancor fighting the robot scene was cool. Boba Fett and Din Djarin fighting off wave after wave of gangsters was cool. The train heist was cool, but none of these scenes are earned. You earn a bombastic action set piece by giving your characters moments to breathe and develop. I'll give you 2 examples from the same show even. Game of Thrones Season 2. The Battle of Backwater is a huge action set piece, and it's earned. It's slowly built up across the entire season. Characters are preparing for it and reacting to it. There's ample character growth, and we're invested in the battle when it finally comes. It's not just that the action is cool, it's that we care about what happens to the people who are in it. Contrast that with the final season of Game of Thrones, where the forces of light stupidly send out their Dothraki cavalry from their fortified position to attack the army of the dead, not because it makes any sense, not because any named characters are at stake, and not because we as the audience care, but because that visual of the wave of flaming swords blinking out in the darkness looks really cool and impactful. And sure, it does. It does look cool. That's only a cool moment, and a cool moment with nothing holding it up feels hollow and unearned. And that is the entirety of Boba Fett, a series of unearned, hollow, cool moments. At this point, the question is, why do so many shows nowadays suffer from cool scene-itis? Well, first of all, it's entirely possible it's a product of diversity hiring. If you're picking people based on race or gender rather than skill, you're going to end up with people who only know surface-level stuff. And cool scene-itis is absolutely a product of a writer who doesn't know how to write, but knows just enough to know that something should look cool. But of course, we don't know if the writers were diversity hires. It could be just that they're bad at writing. But even then, same thing applies. Secondly, corporate greed is a factor. Regardless of how you feel about the Marvel films, they spent a decade building up to the final confrontation with Thanos, and that slow burn drastically helped the series. Compare that with the DC universe, which crashed and burned right out the fucking gate by moving too fast with their own overlapping plot arcs. The Mandalorian Season 2 finished up the Baby Yoda plotline, as well as having the final confrontation with Moff Gideon, which really should have been the series finale years down the road, because they didn't have the patience for a slow burn. And subsequent Mandalorian storylines are going to suffer for it. The way they ham-fistedly brought back Baby Yoda for the Mando scenes in Boba Fett already shows that to be the case. And finally, I think it's because prog writers truly believe that shoehorning in their politics, or if they don't or can't do that, shoehorning in representation, replaces the character development required for a cool scene to actually be earned. I'll use Star Trek Discovery as the example this time. Seasons 3 and 4 have an ongoing story arc involving a non-binary human and a trans man, Trill. For clarification's sake, the non-binary person is biologically female, and being a trans man means transitioning from female to male. These characters have big moments in Discovery, but they feel hollow, because rather than having big character scenes that set them up, their characterization is replaced with representation. I paid attention as best I could, and the only thing I know about Adira, aside from the fact that they're non-binary, is that they have low self-esteem. And I know absolutely nothing about Grey except that they're trans, and they also had their consciousness transferred into a robot body. And at that point, are they even trans anymore? The robot body uses biotech to be identical to a human one, so surely they just make it a male body and call it a day, right? My point is, these characters have climactic scenes that feel unearned, because the meat and potatoes writing that should build up to those scenes instead revolves around their identity and their romantic relationship, to the point that they almost feel like they're in a completely different universe than the rest of the show. The problem here is, a character saying, "I'm non-binary."
How long will that take?
Not more than a few hours. She's pretty fast.
Update me the moment you have something, Commander.
Of course.
They are fast. They, not she. I've never felt like a she or a her, so I would prefer they or them from now on.
Yeah, that counts as only the shallowest character development, and does nothing towards building some kind of a climax. But to a progressive writer whose biggest influence is Tumblr fanfiction, it's probably the only way to write that they've ever known. The Book of Boba Fett wasn't nearly as bad as Discovery, sure, but every time the mod gang was on screen I just wanted to groan. This is Tumblr fanfiction, pure and simple. The real Boba Fett would have shot them in cold blood the first time they mouthed off to him. And so, that was the Book of Boba Fett. A string of cool, unearned scenes held together by focusing on literally everybody else but the titular character, and the few times that he actually gets the spotlight, it's nothing like established lore, and those changes go completely unexplained. Even the actor who played him ultimately agreed.
I was hoping not to say as much as I have already in the first 2 episodes. I speak far too much. In fact, in the beginning, I was trying to get past my lines on to Ming-Na. And I always say, excuse me, director, I really feel that Ming-Na should say these lines because I want to stay mysterious. I want to stay quiet.
At some point, this has to stop, right? They can't keep dumping loads of money into a fire pit forever, right? Like, there has to be a breaking point. There's only so much subverted, flaming garbage these people can pump out before it begins to bankrupt these companies. I didn't pay for this shit. I got it courtesy of the Pirate Bay. And man, oh man, do not shell out a single dime for it. It ain't worth it. It's like I said during the Lord of the Rings video. This stuff only has worth when YouTubers make content out of it. There's nothing else in here that's of value.
Thank you.
So the Wookiee gets a melon a week, though?
Chrysanthemum, you want to share?
What happened?
Nothing, Link. We were just about to have a feast.
Great!